Forced adversity.
Human beings have the ability to learn from the experience of others, and are remarkable for their apparent disinclination to do so.
Perspective. That's what stories are. The perspectives of the creators who channel their lived experience through the characters, the narrative, and the subtextual themes. Those elements represent perspectives of very real people. The characters undertake actions and say dialogue that express the fears, hopes, emotions, and concerns of the writer and other creators. Sometimes a cast of characters can represent several aspects of the creator, or a conversation the writer is having with themselves that connects with real-life scenarios and dynamics between actual human beings. Or various characters in conflict could be an allegory for larger cultural and societal clashes that are happening, or perhaps the writer is afraid of happening, or thinks should happen. This has been true since the dawn of storytelling, and certainly the dawn of comics media, science fiction, and fantasy. But as I said before, these creative industries have historically been dominated by a very specific demographic, and often targeted at that same demographic. This has created the misconception that these forms of media simply inherently are, and should forever be, dominated by those perspectives. Now I know this is probably a shock to you, but I am of that demographic. But let me tell you, I know there is so much more. So many other experiences and perspectives that I haven't and can never have. I could easily sit back, enjoy media created by cis white men, and never consider perspectives outside my own. In fact, that's been the majority of the fictional experiences I've had as a comics and sci-fi fan. But I want more. Setting aside any social disparities or historical marginalization for just a brief moment, on a selfish level, I crave other perspectives. And as a writer myself, and this will probably sound extremely privileged because it is, I'm sometimes frustrated by my own limits in this body and this mind, that I can't reach out and pluck the imagery from people with vastly different lived experiences from myself. But the truth is that in a way, I can. By reading Superman Smashes the Klan, I can for a brief moment get a glimpse of life as an Asian American kid in the 1950s. The fear and alienation, but also the hope and inspiration. It's beautiful to even grasp a sliver of that perspective. And my own life is enhanced. By watching Lovecraft Country, I'm able to learn about the ways African Americans were treated in the first half of the 20th century. The ways that aren't taught in school, even when we learned about separate bathrooms and water fountains and the civil rights movement. I learn about sundown towns. And as with HBO's Watchmen, when I learned of the Tulsa Massacre, which has thankfully gained more awareness since I covered that in my most viewed video. But for a few episodes of that show, from the safety of my 21st century perspective as a white man, I was fortunate to connect, to cry, as my mind was opened a bit to the horrors faced by people with very different experiences, perspectives, than my own. That connection is only possible through stories, and not by any other means. That slice of humanity is not mine, nor can it ever be. But in the pages of a comic or the runtime of a film or show, I can find broader meaning in this fucked up world by seeing things outside my own perspective. I am a richer person for that. When a lesbian or transgender woman or black or Hispanic or disabled writer is hired to write a story, it's not simply because of the color of their skin or their sexuality or their gender. That's a very common refrain of the anti-fan, but as usual, it's extremely reductive and not an accurate appraisal of reality. Sure, a corporation may want the optics of, hey, we hired a queer writer, because it allows them to grab a larger share of the market. We do still exist in a capitalist society after all, but fundamentally, they were hired because of the perspective that writer or creator's experience brings to the story. The diversity is not just about the creator's outward inherent traits. It's about the unique values that the writer's lived experience brings to the table, which makes stories more diverse in a narrative sense. The capitalist view is, of course, about profit, but that doesn't make the perspective, the experience, any less valid nor valuable. And some people are incapable of or simply don't want to see outside their own perspective. This is not just the core schism within fandoms, but it's the crack in society's foundation. The rise of Trump, BLM, the pandemic, these are all symptoms of the two Americas that we exist within. And that rift has become unavoidable. There is no neutral position. To be apathetic, to not take sides, is to default to the status quo, which gives weight to the way things have always been. And it only empowers those who will stop at nothing to maintain that dynamic. Apathy, neutrality, these are tools of oppression. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. You either care enough to speak out, or you choose to allow the worst aspects of humanity to thrive. One thing I've seen over and over in my time as a YouTuber is how many people seem to believe that their subjectivity, their personal perspective, is the one true objective view. And, we all do this to some degree. But when someone is certain of their perfect worldview and opinions, that takes on a more hostile tone as they must defend their views and alienate those who see it differently. Everyone has unique, sometimes contrasting perspectives, and the only rational way to exist in such a society is to accept this fact. Learn to listen and value other perspectives, and on a personal, individual level, benefit from such a beautiful spectrum of experience. As certain political and social topics become more tense and ubiquitous in media, and those topics are chewed up and regurgitated via hyperpartisan media outlets, people become more aware of social issues. As Black Lives Matter continues to grow and push for reasonable, pragmatic change, it's also demonized nonstop in conservative media. Conservatives begin to see the issue of systemic racism, which has existed since the start of this country, as political. And it is, but it always has been. That's not new. It's only just now that society is finally forced to reckon with the atrocities of the past and how that history continues to contribute to harm for so many people. Conservatives will nitpick the way certain stories address racial disparity in comics or movies, despite those media always having elements of it. They'll say, that's not a good way to do it, or this shouldn't have messages in it, or don't shove it down our throats. But over time, it's become obvious that there is no proper, correct way, in their minds, for these things to exist in media. They want it gone. They don't want to think about it. They don't want to accept these relevant themes in their media because it defies their insular, entitled perspectives.